you didn't really have anybody to hide from because in a town of 450 people, everybody's too busy doing their own thing to kind of be snooping into their neighbor's business. So it was kind of a common thing for us, but it wasn't common everywhere.
You are, I would consider, an expert on not only all things homeschool, because you were homeschooled and you do homeschool, but you have your head wrapped around, and I want you to share a little bit about homeschooling history, just when it comes to laws and the legality of it, because you lived some of those early pioneer years. You had experiences with your parents when here in our state, Audra and I live in Idaho, it was actually illegal to homeschool in Idaho. And so I want you to dive in to that story a little bit about your parents' challenges with that, what that was like, what the landscape of homeschooling was like. Did you come from the era where you were like shutting blinds and that sort of thing? And then we're going to kind of fast forward to what it's like today, because you're kind of known as the poster child for homeschool freedom, for, keep maintaining and keeping our homeschool freedom, privately funded, independent homeschooling. And without a doubt, I believe that's probably due to the threats that you saw as a child, and that you know that our freedom is never really secure unless we stand for it. So take us back to the 80s in your state, and what was the landscape of homeschooling then?
Well, in Idaho, homeschooling was something of a contentious thing. In the 80s, you could homeschool, but the statute was such that the supervision of homeschoolers fell to the superintendent of schools for that particular school district. Now, where I grew up, I don't think our superintendent cared. I mean, it was pretty laid back, pretty quiet. We were also very rural. And so you didn't really have anybody to hide from because in a town of 450 people, everybody's too busy doing their own thing to kind of be snooping into their neighbor's business. So it was kind of a common thing for us, but it wasn't common everywhere in Idaho. And that level of just kind of acceptance of homeschooling was not common everywhere in Idaho. And one of the most pivotal events in Idaho homeschool history happened in the early 80s when a district superintendent for a school district down here in southern Idaho decided he did not like how a homeschool family in his school district was homeschooling their kids. And because the statute kind of gave him supervisory authority over them, he wielded that kind of with an iron rod, and really wanted to treat their homeschool setting as if it were a public school. So he was he wanted, them to operate during normal school hours. He wanted them to have a fire escape plan. He wanted to know what curriculum they were using. He wanted them to, what their educational background was. And at some point, the parents kept trying to provide him the information, provide him everything he kept asking for. And eventually they just couldn't meet all the requirements. And it came to a head when he put his foot down and said, "You're sending your kids to public school or you're not schooling." And the parents said, "We can't because we feel like God has called us to homeschool our kids." And he sent the sheriff out to their homes and arrested the parents and put their children in foster care.
Wow.
And it just, if you ever have an opportunity just to hear that story, I don't know if you can imagine being a homeschool mom, quietly homeschooling over your kitchen table and hear vehicles coming up your road. And, do you get a chance to say goodbye? How long will it be before you see your kids again?
What kind of foster home are they going into? That would be,
exactly.
I mean, that's terrifying.
And they had nursing infants in the family at that time. And the whole family, all three families were separated from their kids. And the parents served jail sentences for this situation. And unfortunately, and fortunately, to me, this is a testimony of how God uses something that was meant for evil and turns it to good.
Right.
But in the midst of this, it really brought the homeschool question, so to speak, that had kind of been being done behind closed window doors and closed blinds and, in rural mountain communities, whether or not this was a good thing. And there was actually at that time a move in the Idaho State Legislature to outlaw homeschooling outright. And my parents, even in the middle of nowhere, this got media attention and they started hearing about it. And they felt so strongly that homeschooling was not an optional undertaking. It was something they were convicted that they had been called to do, and that it was important for them to engage in the defense of that ability. And so they actually traveled the 6 hours to Southern Idaho from our home to talk with legislators, to testify in committee hearings in support of homeschooling in an effort to make it more, I guess, a more protected undertaking than it had been before. And it took about a decade before Idaho got to a place where parents were at liberty to educate their children as they saw fit, as they were led by the Lord, without direct intervention from the state or direct supervision from school superintendents. So it was a long fight.
Homeschool Insights is sponsored by CTC Math. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com and try it for free. For more great homeschool inspiration and resources, listen to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.